Hello everyone and welcome to episode 128 of the History Hotline. My name is Deanna Lincook and as always I'll be your host today. And today's episode, as I'm sure you are aware, is the long anticipated part 2 of the episode with Dr. Michelle Asantewa and Craig Riley talking about Michael Abbensetts and Empire Road. We are here finally with the part 2. Thank you for your patience waiting for this episode. We had an interval where we were thinking about the situation in Guyana and Venezuela and their decision to potentially annex Guyana. I'm sure by the time this episode comes out, there will be updates within that story that is constantly unfolding that I just won't have considered at this point because I'm recording obviously in the past, but I'm sure we will have some more updates on that as time goes on. So we're back thinking about Michael Abbensetts and Empire Road with his nephew Craig Riley and longtime friend Dr. Michelle Asantewa. And in this episode we think a little bit more about his legacy, especially in relation to some kind of developments with his legacy and the way that we are remembering our elders and those from the Caribbean that made that trip to Britain, and decided to then focus their work and time and energy on making the experiences of those said Caribbean people and working class people more widely in Britain a better time. And I think I wanted to take space in this episode as well at this time to think about Benjamin Zephaniah, who passed away on the day that I'm recording this introduction. And I wanted to take time to say rest in peace and to send love and blessings and peace to his family that will be mourning the loss of such a giant when it came to poetry and literature, and also just for standing on what's right and standing on his beliefs. He really did stand for something, and I think so many of us have been guided by the things he taught through his poetry, through his activism and through his work, but also by the example that he led, standing up for places like Palestine, for South Africa, when it was apartheid, and his poetry always calling out things like colonialism and empire, and all the ills and greed of this world. So I think it's an important time to remember him and remember the likes of Benjamin Zephaniah and people like Michael Abbensetts in the same breath, as their time to join the ancestors has arrived. And so I'll start this episode with another small extract from the interview conducted by Dr. Michelle in 2001 with Michael Abbensetts.
When did you arrive in the UK and what were your first impressions?
I arrived in around 1963. Luckily I had an uncle here, so my first few months or so, I stayed with him and his family. Then I moved into a sort of boarding house owned by a black guy that we knew.
Okay. Do you consider yourself Black, British, Caribbean or Guyanese?
I think Guyanese first and Caribbean second.
What about Black, British?
No, I never thought of myself in that way.
Because it's something that, when we fill in those forms, we would either have to put that down. I don't know if you've ever come across that, having to fill in forms. And they give you this choice of Black, British or Black, Caribbean or other or whatever.
Well, I imagine I would put Black Caribbean, yes. I mean, if the only thing was Black British or White British, then I'd put Black British. But I mean, there's a choice. Because I really suppose I think that to be Black British, you'd have to be born here.
Okay. Do you feel that, it's important to reflect any one of these labels in your writing, the Caribbean, the Guyanese, or the Britishness?
Again, I write about the characters, and I try to write about people as I know them, so that if I know a Black British person, someone born here, I will try to write his character from that point of view. And usually I find that those people don't. Either they're ones who pretend, as someone I once said, to be Caribbeans made in the UK, or they don't want to have anything to do with the Caribbean. They don't really know the Caribbean. if they want to be anything other than Black British, they want to be Black Americans. So those sort of characters I will write from their point of view. I suppose in some ways I'm more easy. I find it easier to write about people who were born in the Caribbean. They don't have to be my age, but I do think if you're born in the Caribbean, especially if you're a Guyanese, you have a certain way of looking at life.
Michael Abbensetts passed away in 2016, and for those of you that don't know, there is a plaque. A plaque has been laid to remember Michael Abbensetts, a Nubian Jack plaque, one of those blue plaques, if you're not aware. And I just wondered if you wanted to speak a little bit more about that process of getting that plaque and how it all came about.
It began with Michelle. I think I was kind of frequently looking and checking to see if, Googling Michael Abbensetts to sort of find things. I actually need to rewind a bit, actually, because also, in 2020, 21, I was starting to read the plays at that time in particular, and one stuck out, which was El Dorado. That's a whole other thing, but that really, whenever I read that, it really feels like it's giving me a bit of an insight into the family history that my own mother would have been part of. So then going back again, you've got George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement having a big impact on all our lives. So then going forward, I've got this sort of interest reignited about Uncle in his writing, and particularly his plays, and then realised that Michelle is putting on it's an online event to commemorate Uncle's passing around towards the end of November. That was 2 years ago, and in that, so seeing that, I send it out to my cousins and my auntie and so on, and then we find ourselves all in this Zoom space together. And it was then that Michelle, you first said a blue plaque, and it really stuck with me. We stayed in touch about a few things. Michelle got in touch with the Nubian Jack Community Trust after that. Dr. Jack there leapt on it, didn't he? I mean, it was almost like it was sitting in his in tray, and someone just needed to remind him that it was time for that to happen. And so that there was a lot of enthusiasm there about that. And and bit by bit, we spoke, we gathered lists of people, we got it organized, we raised some money, and the fact that he lived so close to what used to be the Tricycle Theatre, where he now, I don't know whether I need to check my facts on this, but either Michael's Samba was premiered there. I think that's right. Is it? Do you know, Michelle? Yeah, I need to check that out. But anyway, it was just down the road. So this lovely thing happened where we could have an event in the street, and you just walk down the road. There's the theatre that he would have been so connected with, and we had an afternoon event there. Just really a chance for people to gather and get refreshed and just keep the conversation going. And that was we had such a good turnout, didn't we? I mean, it was incredible. It was like a week of jeopardy beforehand, of even the building owner, I think, had suddenly found out this was happening. So the person who lived in the property was like, yeah, no problem, and he was there, Les, and invited all the street there as well. So there's this lovely feeling. But yeah, the week before, it was just like, who's coming to this, and who's and the day was just perfect, wasn't it? We had a great list of people come along. So Yeah, it was
Nice.
wonderful.
Yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, I had asked Nubian Jack prior to this to do a memorial to a blue plaque for Jessica and Eric Huntley. That was the preface, I guess. So I had like a former, and that involved
Mm.
the family, a group of us, and Nubian Jack. So it was a collaborative effort. And we knew somewhere along the line you have to raise the funds to do this because Jack, a Nubian Jack, is not they're not like unending fount of funding. So you have to raise the money somehow, and rely on the community to do that. So I had this pre, this previous experience of doing that. The difference was is that um, Uncle Eric Huntley is still alive, and even though they're contemporaries, Michael's name was less kind of known. Everybody knows the show, like they'll know Empire Road, but they don't know the writer. Um, Equally, they'll know actors like Joseph Marcel and so on, who came in and actually cut some of
Mm.
their teeth, their theatrical and TV teeth on Empire Road. Don Warrington, another one of Michael's plays, and you know those names, but you
Mhm.
don't know the writer. So, and because I had developed towards the end of his, well, actually, it wasn't that immediate of the end, but I had this relationship with Michael, his, as a friend, an elder friend. I seem to befriend elder guys, and so it was just a natural thing. And I remember, like you as well, Craig. I probably, I knew it was like 5 years. It was coming up to the 5 year anniversary, and I would look to see is anything happening, and then there wasn't, and then I now feel responsible,
Yeah.
and I go, okay, I've got to make it happen, even if it's like just 10 of us, it's whatever, and joy of joys, it was actually mostly the family who turned up,
Mm.
and it was really really lovely. I was so chuffed, and I thought, no, we have to create the plaque, and so on. And then yeah, it was, now that we look back on it, it was kind of sort of semi fun, but at the time it was like, no, this is getting a bit intense. We're trying to contact all these people, these actors, all this, all this that, trying to contact some of the theaters, and we was, it was a bit of a struggle. And then on the day, everybody just appeared like out of seemingly nowhere. I'm like, how do
Right.
they do this?
It's like, reply. So we should have done an RSVP. It's
Yeah,
like,
they never
just let us
replied.
know so we could relax in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that probably speaks to then the legacy that Michael left in a sense. And even though I can imagine maybe my generation now will go into the process of learning about him, the fact that that blue plaque is there, I really do take notice of those plaques when I walk around, especially in London. I don't know if everybody else does, but I definitely do. And I'm always interested to see who kind of pops up around my like route or whatever else. So yeah, to see that one there and for that to now be there for the foreseeable future for a long time will open up his story to another generation and to continuing generations, which I think is really important. And it's fantastic. I don't think I've ever spoken about it, but the work that Newbie and Jack do to get these names and these people um, kind of recognized, but also recognized in a particular geographical location. It makes their lives a little bit more real to say this person, worked here, lived here, stood here, was here in this place. So I'm really happy that that kind of was able to happen for him, and I guess it will kind of launch the kind of process of remembering Michael Abbensetts in that way. And where was the plaque? Just for those that don't know, where is it? Where can they go and see it?
It's at Buckley Street, 41 Buckley Street in Kilburn. So if you find the address for it's now called the Kiln Theatre. It's right on the corner of Kilburn High Road and Buckley Street. There's a junction there. It's a kind of classic, kind of late Victorian terraced house, and I didn't know it, but I found out afterwards that Yvonne Brewster, OBE, who was the theatre producer for the what's the name?
Talawa.
Yeah.
Talawa. Lived on the opposite corner. So I met her afterwards, actually, because she had the memory sticks from Michael's laptop that he gave to her. And and so it's extraordinary to think there's this funny little kind of enclave of theatrical creativity around this street. I mean, I never knew when he lived. I've never been there when he was living there. We always used to travel to London. We lived in Derbyshire, and our family would come down when he lived in Shepherd's Bush. So that was the place. That was Plan B, I guess, if if anything went wrong with the 41 Buckley Road.
Yeah, that was where I visited him.
Yeah.
That wasn't the last place, obviously, but that was the most place. I think that was the longest. I think he had lived, and also that was the haunt in terms of the theatre experience. And I had forgotten that that Yvonne lived on the street, because I remembered that he was always in her house. She used to say he was always in her and her husband were quite good friends with Michael.
And I love that idea that also he would live places very close to places where it's not like living close to where you work as such. It's more like living close to sort of, I don't know, get some vibe off the place, because Shepherd's Bush being so close to the BBC. I can't remember who said that, but someone said to me, "So you know why I lived in Shepherd's Bush? It was because he just wanted to be close to the BBC." And sure enough, it wasn't that BBC that commissions him. It was Pebble Mill in Birmingham, but I guess. Yeah, and it was Pebble Mill that also would have been the producers of Black Christmas. I think.
Possibly, yeah, because it's around the same time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's the one you haven't seen, Deanna.
That was
You
Pebble
haven't
Mill as
seen,
well in '77. Yeah,
Black Christmas.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, no, I haven't watched that one yet. I need to see that.
That's one that's ahead. I feel was very much ahead of its time.
Really,
you could really go into these deep spaces, these deep, provocative. Because he was always like Michael. I should say. I mean, I did it when I did the blog after he passed. I talked about how we actually met, and he was a writer in residence at my university. So I was finishing off my undergraduate there, and they had this session where they would introduce us to the writer in residence. So I was in the class. Was I older than the rest of the students? I don't know whether I was older necessarily, but anyway, we was in the class, and then I don't even know what he said. He came there, and it's supposed to be kind of respectful, and he's saying whatever he's saying, and he must have said something that I just didn't think was right. And I just challenged him on whatever it was, which now I cannot even remember. And I remember the teacher just looking, this Indian teacher just looking on. And we started to have a back and forth. Like it went on for ages, Michael and I. And but then that kind of set a precedent for our subsequent conversations where we didn't necessarily argue, but we were very forthright, and he was very honest, and he could be quite prickly, like, if he said he got his teeth stuck into something, and he would churn it out and work it out. And sometimes, I'm me being a younger generation, I'm just like, but no, it's not like that, and what have you. So and he's like, yes, and there was this like, but then he invited me after this first meeting to one of his a reading that was taking place at the Tricycle. It was like, I can't even remember. It was a curious one that never got anywhere. But he invited me to see that, and I think it was because I was quite challenging, or I challenged his whatever his ideas was. He wanted me to give him feedback, which was quite, when you think of it, it's quite humbling. I didn't know who he was from Adam. Like, I didn't know who he was, so they just brought this guy into the class. He said his thing. I could hear the guy in his nest, and I was just like, we were just off. And then he had his little room at the uni, and we could go and have him counsel us in that godfatherly way, including myself. I showed him some of my own work. And he was always very good, very generous, very thorough. Um, yeah, as I've said before, he was very honest in his writing, honest in his creative work, but also in terms of when he spoke with me, he was honest even about his personal stuff. If you know what I mean, it was like that kind of. He didn't like, oh, she's this age, I have to like sugarcoat what I'm saying with her. He was very open, very honest, and that's, to me, is the best kind of writer and the best kind of relationship that you could forge with somebody like Michael.
Absolutely, definitely. And yeah, I think it just shows the kind of far-reaching nature of his work as well, in this kind of academic mentoring capacity, as well as writing for literally the whole country, on a show like Empire Road. And I wondered, just for my own kind of personal curiosities, but did he come to England as a writer? Was that the plan when he arrived, to write and to do that kind of work? Or
Yeah, he came in the 60s, but I don't think he came with the intention of writing. Um, but I don't know. He was inspired by seeing something, but I can't remember what it was that he did come to do. Whether he came to study. It's somewhere there, though. It's somewhere in the archives, and the
Yeah, when
information is there.
it
But it wasn't. He didn't come to write. Um, and in speaking with him, I think Michael was just trying to get out anyway. And he certainly didn't want to go into the confines of like a profession, like becoming a doctor, which or one of those stables. That was the contention that he would have had with his father, his very strict father, and that's what you're supposed to do. And he didn't want to do that. And he went to see, what was the play that he saw at, was it at the Royal Court or somewhere like that? He saw a play, Look Back in Anger, or
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's when he thought, yeah, I want to do this. That's my
wow,
understanding.
that's interesting.
yeah,
And he went to Canada
Okay,
first, though,
okay.
right.
before coming, and he also went to
Oh
America
wow.
for a while.
Yeah, all the siblings were in Canada for a
Ah.
bit, and then they are, because there was Uncle Michael, my mum, Annette, and then my auntie Elizabeth. So um, he stayed and had the glamorous life in London from our perspective. We were in Derbyshire, and my auntie Elizabeth and family and cousins were up in
Oh wow.
Yorkshire, actually. Yeah.
So I kind of get the sense, growing up then, did you kind of know that he was the Michael Abbensetts who was doing all this writing and doing this work, or was he just kind of your uncle in London?
That's really, because it definitely, I remember for sure. I mean, I would have been, what would I have been, yeah, 6 or 7 when it came out. But I remember a big deal. I'm not even sure we had a TV when the first series came out. I think yeah, I don't know who I would ask about that. My sister, I suppose. The but we knew it. We knew something was happening. That certainly my mum would have been talking about it. Would have been, and it was a big deal in the family, in our household, and with the cousins and my auntie as well, I guess. And and just visiting him in London, we were always aware of that he was doing something special. Yeah. As you say, we didn't know particularly what that would be, but we knew it involved the TV.
Wow.
And also we knew that because also one thing I really remember was when he introduced me to the producer of the TV program about the school.
Grange Hill.
Thank you. I could remember the theme tune, but not the name. I was like, I'm going to have to sing this now. So that was always the sort of big deal. It's like, what are all these TV people?
How do you know them? Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I was just wondering also then, so we've had the plaque which was unveiled July this year, July 2023. And we mentioned the kind of archive that's building and reference some of the people that have some of the kind of material and the works and the interviews that Michael has spoken in and been a part of. How are you going to kind of, I guess, continue with this legacy and make sure that history is properly archived? She says, as a historian, needs it in somewhere safe. Kind of how is that all developing and growing?
I mean, for the moment, the momentum that developed because of the plaque has allowed, first of all, to find out what was available that my cousin Justine, Michael's daughter, had in her possession. So she had a lot of the stuff, and Uncle Michael was very good at saving things. So he had all the cuttings from newspapers, magazines. He saved the letters. He saved drafts of scripts. So there's all of that, and also my cousin Justine also has all the episodes on VHS, which at some point will get digitized so that we don't have to keep going to the BFI. We'll have our own.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then the plaque happens, and then because particularly because Michelle knew who to get in contact with, the conversation continues there. So a few people have been in touch. One very close friend of Michael for a while had lots of material that hadn't been that hadn't even been turned into anything, so scripts and so on. And then, I said before, Yvonne Brewster gave the memory sticks, which has got some interesting things in there. So there's been this period of letting it settle. I also sort of have had this thing of just seeing, what the momentum would gather around it, and here we are doing a podcast that I've listened to plenty over the last 2 years. So what I imagine happening at some point is I need to speak to Michelle, and we'll be like, right, what are we going to do with this now? Yeah. I think what's been really interesting for me is a sort of after the plaque went, and after we kept these things safely, was to think, well, I didn't even know what an archive was for. Is it just like a collection of stuff that just gets dusty? And that's what's been really nice, is sort of realizing actually a lot of it through things associated with you, Deanna, as well as some other things. But it's just this idea that archives are there, and they're completely, like, if people take and uncover things that they need, new things get built from that, and really like alive and dynamic things that can really change. And so that for my own thing is now, yeah, I get it. So now the question for me is, and it's something that I will completely want to consult Michelle, because I find she's one of the guardians of Michael, always in life and after. So to find the best places for
Yeah.
that to exist. So there are some options. What we've got to sort of decide is where are the best places where it can become something and it can continue this momentum,
Absolutely.
which I think has been extraordinary.
Yeah, I wanted to just add to that. Well, it's really great that the archiving has really started to flower, and and it will only just keep growing, and and it's like you said, Craig, it's really up to us about how we animate it. And the great thing about it was is plays. It's plays, it's TV, it's all these sorts of things. So there's an unending string of it's creative writing, things that you could do with it. And we could certainly take counsel from the likes of Uncle Eric and Jessica Huntley, who they have a conference every year around their archive. Yeah. So hopefully, Craig, you can come to the next one. They're usually
Oh
in
yeah.
February. And you too, Deanna. If you've, I don't know if you've ever been
I
to it. You
think
have?
I remember when we met. Sorry, this is quite an aside for the podcast, but I remember, Michelle, when we met, you said, "Do you think you recognise me?" And I have been before. I went in 2020, and when you
Oh,
mentioned Eric Huntley, Uncle Eric, I was like, "Wait, that's where I've seen you before." It was in at the London
wow.
Metropolitan Archives. Yeah, I
That's
was
right.
there. Yep,
Yeah.
there we go.
Okay. So yeah. So um, brilliant. Definitely would be good, Craig, for you to come to that one. I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't seen the ads or whatever for it. But Auntie Auntie Jessica's passing. She is 10. It was 10 years in October on the 13th, and they had a big celebration thing for her for that, which was really good. And they had that at the museum. So wherever those spaces are, we can animate. We can animate it. So when I go to Guyana as well, that's the other thing I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing, thanks to Murray House Trust, which is one of our cultural spaces. They've agreed to host a tribute to mark the 7th anniversary, because I'll be there around then. They usually do their events on a Tuesday, so this will be Tuesday the 21st. Your listeners will hear about this afterwards, but at least that is what's happening. And what it will involve is a little introduction to the Guyanese audience, if you like, who wouldn't know who Michael is. And so we have to. My thing is really making sure that whichever the space is, because Guyana would have been important to him. That's where he cut his teeth, as it were. And so it's important that they recognise him there, and it will involve a reading of one of the plays by some of the local actors. So I think that's really good. And they don't, they kind of have a trust, like, like how we have national trust.
Mm.
They kind of have something like that. Um, and I've been encouraged by Isabel de Carres, who runs Murray House, that we should maybe try and speak to them to see what is possible. We're not holding out, but we can always just, because they don't have plaques
Mm,
and things like that.
yeah,
Yeah, and why not?
absolutely.
you know. So that's a potential.
Yeah.
If ever there's going to be one, I will. My instinct, my everything would be about trying to get one done for Michael for
Mm,
sure, somewhere, somehow, however
yeah.
way. Um, and the other thing I should say is that the Murray House Trust, Isabel that I spoke with, she was very keen on acknowledging the fact that Michael came from New Amsterdam. He wasn't from Georgetown. I saw that somewhere on a Twitter where they said he was born in Georgetown. I was like, well, okay,
Mm.
but because a lot of the people that they speak about tend to be just like London, yeah, it tends to be like they're from Georgetown.
Mm.
But here's Michael, he's like from all the way sort of further afield, if you like, in New Amsterdam. And so just showing that those young people who are there, look, there's this area that you're from, somebody came from and made good in terms of succeeding in their discipline out of the country, if necessary, but that could still be an inspiration for you whilst you're here.
Absolutely, and you definitely raised an important point of making sure these people, not just Michael, but I think in the broader context of these people from the Caribbean that have come and settled in Britain and really have made a life and shaped the way that we see ourselves and in all aspects of life and different walks of life, that they are also recognised back home, because I think so many people back home, noticed everybody was leaving. Well, what were they actually doing over there, and I feel like you're right in saying that so many people don't actually know the battles they had to take on, because there hasn't really been much to kind of speak on that, and until you kind of take those people and their stories and bring them back home, for them to be shared, it's quite a difficult path to tread. So again, I think you've already done such incredible work for us all to even be here having this conversation about Empire Road and about Michael Abbensetts, and you'll continue to do that. So kind of sending my good wishes with you as you go to Guyana and kind of take on this process. And I think it's important as well that we've got things like the plaques in Britain, which are like a geographical marking of Michael's life. And then you've said the event in Guyana, which will be actually, I think this episode will release on that same day in line with the anniversary of Michael's death, which was the 24th of November. And then the kind of poetic nature of his work being, redone by actors in the contemporary sense as well. And there is so much potential with his work, with his life, as I look at it as a historian doing the work, but then also artistically, creatively, for the next generation to maybe reinterpret his work or see it through a different lens or see it through modern society post 2020 and whatever else has happened. So there is just so much potential for his life and for his legacy, shall we say, as that continues to grow. And I'm sure that your family are super proud to kind of see this now. And I feel it's always a shame that these things happen in death, but I hope he felt celebrated also in his life, of all the kind of people he was able to kind of put on the map. Joseph Marcel, for anyone that hasn't made the connection, that's Geoffrey from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on British TV in Britain before he heads to the States and becomes Geoffrey and becomes a household name. So many people kind of set up for great things, Norman Beaton before Desmond and whatnot, all because of Michael Abbensetts writing this script and his other scripts. We haven't even spoken so much about his other works. We've kind of delved into Empire Road. I think it might be a good entrance point for most people who know of him. But there are so many other plays we could speak about in regards to his work as well. I'll leave us then with saying something. I think, Craig, you mentioned Googling Michael Abbensetts, and I think I did the same when you mentioned him to me when I did the Desmond's episode. And since that point, I think that might have been over a year ago to now, and kind of the more like newspaper articles, so much more information just by the simple thing of a Google search to kind of track the momentum of this story and this legacy, I think is remarkable. And I guess this will be another thing to Google as you move forward. But yeah, I think it's clear that not just in the case of Michael, there are also so many other historical figures within Britain that I think we're unfortunately getting to a point where we're really glossing over and doing quite lazy histories where we kind of just look at the big, maybe the loudest figures or whoever had the kind of most memorable moments within Black British history. And it's the same way that I think African American history is done, where you get these like high figures and don't really think about anybody else. So I'm happy that stories like Michael's is kind of cutting across that narrative, because I think it's important to look at the wide ranging narratives of kind of all the people from the Caribbean that came over here in that post-war time.
Very good.
Yeah, brilliant. I just want to commend you as well, actually, Deanna, for being a young soul
Oh,
with
thank you.
that is somebody like, I'm interested in Michael
Yeah.
Abbensetts. I'm like, okay. So I find that quite fascinating, and it shows that that seriousness that you speak about, that commitment as well, and it speaks to the ancestors, that
Mm,
connection moving forward, because with your interest, it can only just carry
thank
forward,
you.
Mm.
because some of us who are a little bit, we're not past
Ah.
it or anything, but it needs for that baton, it needs young people like yourself to be interested
Mm,
enough to want to give it that thorough um, looking
mm,
at and consideration, and that's what you've been doing consistently. So I really, really commend
thank
you
you.
in
Thank
this
you so
work
much.
as a young historian.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thank you for your
No, it's
podcast. Because
okay.
again, for me, that was this was the source of um, you know, re-establishing. I guess for me as a mixed race
Mm,
person, with orphaned, I look. I've really seen your podcast as a resource
thank you.
for, uncovering things which I didn't know.
Thank you.
When
Yeah.
yeah, thank
No,
you.
it's okay. It's I don't know. I genuinely just love doing it. So it's
Yeah,
so
I can see
interesting to me. Um,
that. Yeah,
yeah, and I think at the core of it is just probably my age or a bit younger is the time where that kind of generation of people moved over to Britain, this like complete unknown journey and adventure. And I don't think I have the balls to do that. I wouldn't, I'll be honest. So the fact that they did that and then managed to settle, form families, communities, write amazing plays, all of that stuff, to me is just mind blowing. And I think there's no reason why we shouldn't be celebrating them very loudly. So we'll continue to do
yeah,
that here as long as we can.
yeah. Good.
But thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been a fantastic episode. It's the first one with two guests, so I hope that's gone well. Thank you everyone for listening, and Michelle and Craig, thank you for being here today.
Thank
No
you.
worries.
Thank you,
Thank
Diana.
you. Bye.